I've had a strange relationship with Elden Ring. I remember being incredibly excited before it launched, like I always am with any From Software game, but when it released, I was hit with mixed feelings. On one hand, jumping back into a more classic Dark Souls style experience after replaying Bloodborne and Sekiro didn't feel quite right to me. I was kind of burned out from the whole Dark Souls more classic style after Dark Souls 3 released, and the endless stream of low-effort Souls-like clones that other companies were attempting only worsened that fatigue. This was pre-Lies of P release era, by the way. On the other hand, the sheer scale of Elden Ring simply overwhelmed me. I was tired of open-world games that followed the bloated Ubisoft formula, and while this game was clearly different, I hadn't played Breath of the Wild yet, so I wasn't familiar with this more organic approach to exploration. That overwhelming freedom felt like pressure to me. There were too many possibilities and paths available, and that added with the difficulty that comes from these games, I had no idea where to begin with. It was just a bit too much for me at the moment. And even though I had memorable moments like discovering the Sea of a River or diving into those large and more familiar structured dungeons, I mostly felt stressed. I wanted to explore, but I constantly questioned if I was doing it right. So after about 25 hours in, I dropped the game. It certainly didn't help that I got sucked into Lost Ark for a month. Yeah, I know, kinda cringe, but seeing so many people glaze and praise Elden Ring endlessly while I was simply not clicking at all made me feel like I was supposed to love it, adding pressure which only made me eventually even resent the game. So yeah, we could say I became a hater of some sort, I don't know. But what changed then? Let's fast forward to 2024 for that, when the DLC was officially announced. It had been 2 years since I last touched the game, and since then, I would always have this afterthought that I should give it another shot at some point. I love this genre, so it didn't make sense that I didn't connect with this game at all. It might have just been a matter of timing, that's what I said to myself. So, with the small excitement that the trailer gave me, I made the very smart decision to pre-order the expansion, despite not even liking the base game yet. Yeah, I know, not my brightest moment, but I was committed to giving it a proper shot. What I didn't anticipate was that something else would come out at the same time that would delay my return a bit more. That is, until Nightreign was announced later that year as a completely new standalone experience inside the franchise. That would become the final push I needed to once and for all give Elden Ring a fair shot. This would be my last attempt. My goal was simple, try to finish the base game, and if I still don't click with it after hours and hours of attempts, I would walk away for good and accept I was just the odd person who didn't like this game, and that was fine. Safe to say though, that's not what happened. I was open to finally being able to like this game, but what I didn't expect was that Elden Ring would not only become one of my favorite From Software games, second only to Bloodborne maybe, but also one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had really. But it didn't happen instantly though. It was a slow burn and a very unique and curious journey to see unfold, one that I would probably divide into 5 chapters, with the first one being if I had to pinpoint what made my experience so difficult with this game, all fingers would point to Limgrave. Which is curious because Limgrave is objectively one of the best designed starting areas ever created in video games. It presents you with everything you need to know to start your adventure on the right footing. It teaches you the basic functionalities of the game and how the multiple activities work and are found, be it the multiple challenges, the side quest progressions, the catacombs, or the secrets hidden within the map. It shows us the level of verticality that the areas are designed with in mind, and the possibilities that this opens to the player, with the newly introduced jump button making a huge impact when exploring, especially inside the big and linear dungeon levels. And it teaches us how to explore and embrace the freedom of choice given to us, how to identify what is the main path to continue and what is optional for us to do or not, how to know that if a zone feels too difficult at the moment, maybe you should choose one of the multiple other paths presented to you and come back later when you're stronger, how to identify the clues given to know what is worth exploring and what isn't, and to understand that you don't need to check every inch of the map out of fear of missing out. Things are more obvious than they seem. And most importantly, it teaches us how to do all of this with pretty much no markers or guides while exploring. Only you, the map, and the interest sparked by whatever is presented in front of you. All of that is incredible, but it's also a lot for someone unfamiliar with this kind of open world design, especially if you're not in the right mindset. I wasn't. Everything felt like a chore. I was drowning in FOMO and stressing over missing content because I thought I wouldn't be able to properly advance, making exploration feel exhausting rather than exciting. The second playthrough though was slightly different, because I had two things I didn't have before. First, I had played a bit of Breath of the Wild, so I had a better understanding of how this game design worked, although not really fully. And second, I had already explored most of Limgrave before, so I didn't feel as lost. Still, it wasn't an easy process. I was having a rough time getting used to things, and the game was still not really clicking with me this second time. It didn't really help that I didn't really love the visual style of Limgrave. It's not that it looked bad, it was fine, it had scenes that were really impressive, but most of the times it was just kind of like a simple foresty vibe, and that isn't really my thing. But then I beat Stormveil Castle again, and I finally entered Liurna for the first time. That's when things started to change. Liurna's presentation immediately captivated me. It was visually stunning and clearly structured for someone like me, with 3 main paths guiding me to one same direction. That alone helped me a lot to ease my decision making, since I was afraid of having to do something as deep and complex as Limgrave all over again. So that's what I did. I chose a path and went for it. At first, I approached exploration with the same anxiety as before, but as I said before, something changed. I started noticing patterns, recognizing when areas were worth my time, spotting clues in the environment that were guiding me towards somewhere, and understanding how the layering of the map was designed for that very same purpose. I got better at recognizing key points of interest, and I realized there was always some kind of hint, subtly or not so subtly, guiding me towards something meaningful, and that the whole map was designed to make my process of exploration easier, not harder. Something that Limgrave taught me, but I didn't realize up until now. That's when that self-imposed FOMO began to fade. I realized the game wasn't forcing anything on me and that I was in control. I started to have fun while exploring, and the experience just became swifter, lighter. For the first time, I remember going to bed thinking, I kinda want to keep on playing this. And when you think that, you know that's the turning point. Things started to click with me. I explored the rest of Liurna, fell in love with the Academy's design, defeated Renala, and moved on with genuine excitement. Also, I got genuinely impressed by how easy to follow and great the stories of the NPC's quest felt. I had no real need to check on an outside guide like in the past, and they were super interesting to follow, really, delving deep into the world and characters and being a massive step up from previous games. But more importantly, I realized I had been approaching this game in the wrong way all along, trying too hard to adapt to the game when in reality it was the game adapting to me. There were no rules to play by, only the ones I chose to set. Liurna was probably the most important chapter of this journey, but what truly made me realize that this was more than simple fun, but something special, even by From Software standards. And something that I would eventually fall in love with was what awaited me on the other path leading out of Limgrave. The first time you get to Caelid is something unique, to say the least. It's desolate, eerie, and you could even say kind of ugly at some points. But at the same time, it has this weird, even magnetic energy that pulls you in, something that instantly makes you curious about it. It reminded me of when I first got a glimpse of Alto's Plateau before getting here, how its wide, open battlefield, filled with giant flags, seemed to tell a story all on its own, without really needing a single word of dialogue. Caelid gave off that same kind of storytelling. Its massive red wasteland, its grotesque and terrifying monsters, you know? It wasn't just a place to explore to find loot or tough enemies. It felt more like some sort of scar on the world that I wanted to know more about. And I couldn't stop wondering what had happened here. That sense of mystery is what pushed me forward the most, way more than what Limgrave or Liurna ever did. And that build-up peaked the moment I reached Redmane Castle. After battling my way through the terrors that Caelid had put in front of me, I expected a brutal, enemy-filled fortress, but instead I got greeted with silence, emptiness, no one really to stop me. For a brief moment, it almost felt peaceful, like a well-earned relaxing moment that I most certainly needed, not gonna lie, until I stepped into a room filled with familiar faces, NPCs who I had met across my journey, all standing together in one place ready to face something bigger. A festival of war which we have all been invited to equally, presented by a knight of the castle in a speech so grand and theatrical that it immediately pulled me in. That's when I knew this game was aiming higher than just another great Souls-like game. This was a moment that brought all these story threads and characters I had been meeting and experiencing throughout my journey into one place, all ready to face the challenge in front of us together. That followed by a cinematic cutscene that delved deeper into the land I was in and the lord who ruled over it, something unique to this encounter and a first for FromSoft games ever, was the perfect setup for what I was about to experience. A battle for the ages against Radahn. From the very first moment you step into the ring and see how you are greeted, you know this is something else. But this is not just about you and Radahn, this is a battle for everyone invited, being able to summon every warrior gathered for the festival to fight by your side, making the summoning mechanic not simply a tool to make it easier for yourself, but an intricate part of the design of this experience. This isn't just a regular boss fight, it feels like war, an event, a celebration of everything we like so much about these games that simply wants to make us feel like we're part of something massive, timeless even. The scale of it all is unlike anything FromSoft had ever done before, from the moment Radahn crashes onto the battlefield to the chaos of the fight itself. This encounter felt unique, fresh, creative, and most certainly legendary. Yes, summoning may make the fight mechanically easier, but that's not the point, or it didn't feel like that to me. The point was the sheer spectacle of it all, the emotion behind it, and the payoff to the whole build-up leading to this very moment. Seeing all those stories, all those characters I had followed now come together like this, that's when I realized Elden Ring was reaching for something bigger than simply being a rehashed Dark Souls 4. And it wasn't just the spectacle of the fight or the depth of the exploration that I learned before that gave me this feeling. It was how the story and the lore were being woven into the world and its characters in a way I could actually follow and grow invested in. It still held that signature mystery and cryptic storytelling Miyazaki is known for, but this time it felt more approachable, less like I needed external help to understand something. And just as this moment was crucial to the story, it also marked the point the game completely won me over. If something this impactful was being shown to me so early in the journey, what else was waiting for me ahead? I was hooked by the lore, the world, characters, and obviously the gameplay that until this point was the main aspect that kept me going. In the end, Liurna was the moment that helped me click and allow me to keep on going, but Caelid, with Radahn at its heart, was the igniter that truly fired up my love for the game, and everything after that kept up the momentum. Altus Plateau, the Volcano Manor and its incredible quest, Leyndell and its beautiful streets leading up to the Erdtree and Market, all incredible, immersive and easy to get lost in. But I still had one lingering desire, some sort of real challenge. You know, there are tons of bosses in Elden Ring, and frankly, most are quite forgettable. The recycled enemies, filler encounters, and the repetitiveness of the catacombs got old really fast. Some could be saved, but most of these encounters were frankly just boring in concept, design, and execution. That said, the main bosses, mostly phenomenal. But while some of them were a competent challenge, I felt like the game needed something more difficult that gave off a feel of high-stakes thrill that I think the main story lacked at certain specific key moments, especially towards the final stretch. I needed something like that to crave my desire for a big and satisfying challenge that played at equal power as me, and that's when I met Malenia.
I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and I have never known defeat.
I heard stories about Malenia and how crazy she was. And sadly, she was one of the few spoilers I couldn't avoid after these long 3 years. I knew she healed, had 2 phases, and had a crazy movement skill, but other than that, I was blind and ready to beat her. And quite honestly, I thought to myself, she can't be that bad, right? 6 hours. That's the amount of time she spent humbling me until she fell, and I idiotically deleted the footage of my clear by accident. But it's fine, because I went in again later and I got to record this scuffed kill to have enough footage for this video, because otherwise I'm screwed. Jokes aside, Malenia was everything I wanted from this game, and she was the clear representation of what I love of this genre. These fights aren't difficult just for the sake of it, they are an intricate dance between you and your enemy that is fair, each one feeling like a puzzle, demanding patience and precision while you search for a weakness, an opening, and eventually carving a path to victory with a feeling of satisfaction that is unmatched after finally overcoming something that once felt impossible before. If someone were to ask me what the essence of a Souls-like is, this boss would be a perfect example in my opinion. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I truly believe Malenia is one of the best designed and most unique encounters From Software has ever created. Yes, her aggression, self-healing, and unpredictable moveset can seem overwhelming, but she's also fair. She has clear weaknesses, she's easy to stagger, highly vulnerable to bleed, and even her infamous signature movement can be dodged, interrupted, or countered with the right approach. She is brutal, relentless, and immensely powerful, matching or even exceeding the strength you've come to rely on throughout the game, and that is exactly the point. It feels like a duel between equals, and just as she says herself, you are each other's match, a soon-to-be god facing an undefeated goddess. That's exactly what this fight is and how it should feel. A legendary clash between 2 powerful forces, both majestic but also fair. I understand the criticism. For some, this might be too much, especially if they choose to take her on solo, but she's optional, and nothing is stopping you from calling for help. Would my opinion be different if she was mandatory? Maybe, especially when it comes to that move. But that's not the case, and so I choose to embrace how I genuinely feel about her. I love this fight. I think it's the peak of the game and the final lesson given to you. For me, Malenia was the true final boss. Radahn, while great in his own right, leads into a second phase that just feels boring and forgettable and simply unsatisfying overall. But Malenia, on the other hand, felt like the perfect conclusion to an already unforgettable journey that I was having with Elden Ring. And at this point, I had gone full circle. I went from not connecting with the game at all to becoming obsessed with it. I couldn't stop thinking or talking about it. So yeah, we could say I went from hater to lover, I guess, I don't know. But the best part is that the DLC I pre-ordered ages ago was still waiting for me, proving that I made the right decision. And my expectations for that were high, but no amount of expectations would be enough to give me an idea of what was about to hit me. Shadow of the Erdtree's first impressions are definitely strong from the very first steps you take into its world. The map is incredibly beautiful and intriguing, and the enemies are rough, like really rough compared to the base game. That instantly set the tone for this expansion and shaped my expectations and approach. And to be honest, everything clicked for me really quickly. I had heard pretty much nothing about this expansion, just the drama surrounding its difficulty and the final boss, which sadly I also got spoiled. But I didn't fully trust all of this drama, especially after all the overblown reactions surrounding Sekiro. So I went with a more open mind, and that proved to be the best decision I could have made. Yes, the expansion is way harder than what the base game got us used to, sometimes even deceptively harder because you now have to adapt to the new fragment power-up system instead of just leveling up and overpowering everything by farming. But despite that, it felt right to me. We come from beating the base game, becoming Elden Lord, fully building our character, and defeating Malenia in an epic duel as the ultimate challenge. If what comes after that is just more of the same, sweeping enemies like they are nothing with our old build, it would have felt wrong and honestly quite boring. This is supposed to be the endgame of Elden Ring, and it should feel like it. I really appreciated that the game acknowledged how powerful we became in the base game and then forced us to switch that mentality and adapt to the new situation and challenges. while still giving us the freedom to approach things our own way. I learned pretty early on that my dual katana build wasn't working for me the same way it did before, and it probably had to go, so I started parrying, trying out different weapons, stopped spamming the OP jump attack, and eventually I found my new partner with the backhand blades, which felt like a natural evolution of my fast-paced playstyle. That open-mindedness and willingness to adjust made a huge difference in how hard the DLC felt. Yes, there were definitely some questionable, powerful enemies here and there, just like in any Souls game. But I believe most of the difficulty complaints come from players refusing to change their habits or try new things rather than from actual design flaws. But aside from that, one of the first things that truly impressed me during exploration was how insanely well designed the level layout was. Miyazaki said the DLC would be around the size of Limgrave, right? Yeah, well, maybe on the first layer, because he forgot to mention the multiple layers of verticality hidden throughout the map, each leading to new zones that eventually make the world twice as big as Limgrave. And what's even more impressive is how connected it all is. Seriously, I don't know what kind of masterminds are working at FromSoft, but the way one path leads to another and then branches into multiple areas, all without ever making you feel lost, is just maddening in a good way, of course. On top of that, every one of these areas is insanely creative and beautiful in its own way. Like, genuinely, this is one of the best looking experiences I've ever had, full stop. That level of artistic direction added so much to the thrill of exploration, and just getting to a new zone and seeing how different it felt from the last was part of the magic. But that also leads me to my one real complaint with the DLC. I was super invested into this world, the story, the atmosphere, the exploration, but for as layered, creative and breathtaking as the areas looked, why did it feel like there's less to explore than it seemed? Well, that's because there was actually less. Traversing these zones was always enjoyable, but for as big and impressive as they look, the actual rewards hidden within them just aren't there in the same way as before. Remember what I said about how the base game taught me how to explore by following environmental cues and patterns, how to know when the game was pointing me to something worthwhile? Well, that's still here, but now, when you reach a spot that should have something, a lot of times there's nothing. You have these massive, beautiful areas, each unique, but sometimes they just don't offer much of a reason to exist at that size. They feel like linear levels in disguise. Sure, they deliver on the visual aspect, but they also feel inconsistent on the exploration side. This didn't ruin the DLC for me. Exploration wasn't the main reason why I loved the base game, but I can definitely see why players who did prioritize that might come away from this DLC disappointed. Now, with that said, let's focus on the boss fights, because the encounters in this expansion are on another level, really. Yes, there are a few that don't quite work, due to camera issues or weird hitboxes. And no, I won't bother talking about the repeated bosses scattered around the map, because, well, they are just as bad and boring as in the base game. But the main bosses, not only are most of them excellent, but some are among the best From Software has ever made, in my opinion. Dancing Beast was a bit of a hit or miss, especially with the camera, but it introduced me to the frantic pace of the DLC really well. But then came Relana, and that's when I started going, whoa. She was beautiful, fast, and absolutely brutal. She was the first fight that forced me to change my build just to keep up with her speed, and the victory after that felt so satisfying. She reminded me of Malenia, not just in challenge, but in why I love these games. That moment where my perseverance and thought met triumph. But little did I know that this feeling would keep on coming. It would even become somewhat normalized, especially once I reached Mesmer. Mesmer is probably one of the coolest looking, most well-designed bosses From has ever created. His lore, his design, his moveset, it's all close to perfect. And while he's really tough, I would say he's deceptively difficult. He hits hard, moves fast, and looks imposing. But on the other hand, his attack patterns are clear. He gives you windows to counter, to recover, and he just feels fair. He's a test, one that asks, have you learned and adapted to this new experience? If the answer is yes, then this fight becomes a beautiful dance. If not, and you keep being stubborn, well, you will be stuck. He reminded me so much of Genichiro from Sekiro, a fight that exists to test your mastery of the game's mechanics pretty early on before allowing you to delve deeper into the game. That's exactly what Mesmer is, and the love and effort that went into crafting him shows in every detail. But even after that near perfect fight, the DLC still had more to offer. Some bosses were solid, nothing crazy but good enough, while others were incredible, like Midra, whose area and build-up were spectacular, as was his fight. But two bosses before the end really stood out to me because they each represented the peak of their specific style. First, Pale, easily the best dragon fight FromSoft has ever made. He looked amazing, had great mechanics, wasn't just a damage punch for once, and delivered on the epic feel I want from a dragon fight. And his side quest with Igon wanting to literally wipe out Bale's family tree added so much to the experience. Bale was such an unexpected surprise that I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up as the #1 boss for a lot of people. But then there's Leda. I haven't mentioned the NPCs much yet, but they are great in this DLC, like really good, following on the excellence that the base game set. But Leda and her companions just went beyond that. They felt like my actual companions. They introduced me to the world, followed me throughout my journey, and we helped each other. They were an intricate and vital part of the main story, and I learned to really connect with them. Eventually though, I was forced into a final battle against them where some stood with me based on my actions and their own beliefs, but the majority went against me after we uncovered each other's secrets. This to me didn't really just feel like a boss fight, it was the emotional climax of everything I had experienced with them. It reminded me of Radahn's festival fight, the build-up, the scale, the emotion. This was exactly the same. It wasn't just about proving yourself as some solo god gamer, it was about seeing these characters you call comrades come together one last time, shaped by their beliefs and clashing as a consequence of their own choices. Again, mechanically, this might not have been the strongest encounter, but emotionally, it was one of the best payoffs I've ever had in these games, setting up the ending of the story and the high stakes leading to it perfectly. After that though, it was time for me to finally finish this long journey, and my final challenge was none other than Promised Consort Radahn. There has been a lot of drama surrounding this boss due to its design and difficulty, and quite honestly, I don't want to dwell too much on the obvious because we all know how questionably hard this fight is. He's incredibly tanky, immune to almost every status effect, it's a complete visual mess that makes it hard to read or even understand what is going on. You almost have no windows to recover or attack with how relentless and endless his combos can be, and overall, he has no real weakness. We also know that he needed to get a patch to fix some incredibly dumb attacks and patterns, a patch that I tried for myself with a mod, and despite feeling easier and him dying on the first attempt, due to already being used to the fight, that didn't take away the fact that not only this was a weirdly designed encounter, but also a very poorly tested one. This felt like a fight that went against the design philosophy of these games at times, with a lot of people finding no satisfaction when beating this boss, if they even could. And for a boss that is mandatory and that the average player is supposed to beat to see the ending of the story they have paid for, it is definitely questionable. We all know that. I know that. Yet, despite it all, in between all the confusion and frustration, I had a certain weird feeling of excitement when doing this fight. A feeling that only grew and grew with time as I got used to the fight, until eventually I realized that this fight had won me over. Promised Consort Radahn is probably my favorite fight in the entire game. Now I don't know if this is a hot take or not, it probably is because it sounds kind of insane. But to me, Radahn was everything I wanted to close off my journey, just like Malenia was for the base game, and it was simply phenomenal. Everything leading up to that moment, you know, the story, the tension, the craziness of the arena where you clash, the music in the background, the feeling of absolute nothingness when facing a force of nature like him, and the overwhelming aura he exudes, it all came together beautifully on a scale that is simply unmatched. Yeah, I also got frustrated with the fight and all the visual chaos surrounding it. It's clear that this is a fight that it doesn't always work, but when it works, it does perfectly for me, making me feel like no other battle could. This is certainly a messy design boss fight, I won't deny that, but regardless, this ultimate clash between gods ended up being the perfect closure to my redemption journey with Elden Ring. Radahn was the one who first made me truly fall in love with the game, and in the end, he was the one who sealed that love once again. This expansion elevated my entire experience with Elden Ring in ways I didn't know were even possible after finishing the already excellent base game. It went far beyond what I anticipated and gave me the best possible ending to a truly unique journey. A journey that I thought would be a quick one, but ended up lasting way more than I anticipated, with no real end in sight, with all the mods and builds I want to try out once I have enough time. I'm incredibly glad I pushed through those initial hours, and I'm especially glad I waited 3 years to play this, away from all the pressure and initial hype and with the right mindset. And that to me was one of the biggest takeaways from all of this. The time and moment you approach a video game can be just as important as the game itself. Maybe you are just not vibing with it when you first try it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It might just mean that your head isn't in the right place for it, and maybe you really don't like it, which is totally valid. But there's also a chance you might come back to it later and it will finally click. You might even end up loving it, just like I did. So yeah, I can confidently say it now. I understand where all the fuss was coming from. Elden Ring is a masterpiece, and I was completely wrong.